The majority of clients that come to us, they come to us for, for two reasons. One is obviously the scheduling component that we're talking about. The second is because of our model and the way we've existed for, the last 26 years is we've never had a brick and mortar center. So our talent profile from an agent, I can find talent all across the US that matches exactly where that, that brand is. But
attrition alone, it's almost a no-brainer for most contact centers that if they worked with LiveOps and you let LiveOps replace agents that left, you're taking on the cost of attrition. I mean, it's an easy, roughly 30% savings.
My favorite of all time case study was working with the SBA when COVID hit. And they called us, this was a crazy time. They called us and they said, we need 15,000 agents in a 72-hour period to help with the PPP loans when COVID first kind of hit us. And so.
Welcome to the Contact Center Gurus, the podcast for contact center and customer experience leaders. Learn best practices, new technology, tips and tricks, and more. Listen in.
Welcome to the Contact Center Gurus podcast. I'm Darren Prine, your host, and today's episode is called, What If Your Contact Center Was Perfectly Scheduled? Every hour, every day. Here is a scheduling problem every contact center leader knows. Monday morning hits and you're scrambling. Thursday afternoon crawls and you're paying agents to stare at their screens. The holiday surge arrives and you're calling in every favor you have. And nobody wants the 2 a.m. shift. The traditional 8-hour shift model was built for a world that no longer exists, and it fails contact centers at almost every point in the demand curve. There is a better model. It is called precision scheduling. Instead of locking agents into a rigid 8-hour block, precision scheduling deploys a flexible on-demand workforce in 30-minute intervals, matching your actual call volume rather than guessing at it. The industry broadly calls this gig CX. That's the terminology I've been using. My guest today has his own language for it, and I'll let him walk you through what it looks like in practice. LiveOps has been building and refining this model for 25 years, which is longer than most of the platforms in your tech stack have existed. My guest today is Jon Brown, a Senior Vice President of Client Results at LiveOps. Jon has spent more than 20 years in the BPO space, and his entire career has been built around one thing: making sure clients actually get the outcomes they were promised, not just the headcount they were sold. Before LiveOps, he led operations at Occurrence Teleservices, where he worked his way from director to VP. Today, he oversees client results at one of the most recognized names in flexible outsourcing, a company that has been rethinking how contact centers get staffed for 25 years. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Darren, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. I'm so excited for this. I consider gig CX, I know that isn't the terminology you guys use, but we've used it in so much marketing, I can't get away from it.
Yep.
Which is super flexible staffing, on-demand staffing. And I think it's revolutionary. I believe that almost any CX executive at any company, if they understood all the different value points, would be partnered with a company like LiveOps, just because there's no way for them to naturally staff for all of the scenarios that we're going to talk about today. And I bet you'll agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm excited that you're excited about it. I've been, obviously from a LiveOps standpoint, been doing this for the last 10 years. And I love having the conversation with clients when the light bulb goes on and they're like, wait a minute, we don't have to staff to our peak intervals and burn labor the rest of the time. And so excited to talk about that today.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and dig in with my questions. So when you talk to a contact center leader about their scheduling, what does the daily reality actually look like? The morning surge, the midday lull, the late afternoon spike. How does the traditional shift model fail at almost every one of those intervals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spend a lot of time talking with our clients. especially when they're new to working with LiveOps around what our model solves for. And the reality is, a lot of the industry today has tried to replicate us, essentially what we do in the way that they replicated with either part-time shifts. And so it's part-time morning, part-time midday, part-time afternoon. It solves some of the problem. It doesn't solve, the problem. And so really the contact center leaders that are responsible for making these decisions today, they're really forced with two answers or two questions. Do I want to staff to the high watermark to make sure that our customer experience is as best as it can be? Because we as humans, when we call into a brand, we do not want to wait, or if we text in, or if we reach out on social, we want to be helped when we want to be helped, not when it's convenient for the call center to be staffed. So they ask themselves, do I burn labor from staffing too high, or do I burn our CX? And that's a tough question to ask or answer, right? Because there's not a good outcome of either of those. You don't want to be burning labor, and you definitely don't want to be sacrificing your NPS scores or your CSAT scores or your overall customer experience.
Right. And even part-timers, so what's that, a 4-hour shift instead of an 8-hour shift?
Right.
And sometimes I remember working as an agent for the phone company.
Yep.
There's an hour here, there's an hour and a half there, maybe a 2-hour window, but it's 30 minutes to an hour or so from what I recall. And there's no way that you're not burning staffing dollars for more than you need the rest of the day if you're trying to staff for just those surges.
Yeah, you can't satisfy both questions in a traditional model, or even a, flexible part-time model, or even the, work at home and try to, get around it from that standpoint. You can't solve the, maximizing the CX experience, which is, in my eyes, the most important component of it, as well as be precision staffed to where you're not burning. It's costing you more to achieve those CX scores than what it should be if you had a precision staffing model that it would, flex to exactly where the consumer or the patient or the member demand is at.
Right. I was just going to add on to the question just so people understand. So we know that with traditional staffing, it's going to fail at providing precision scheduling. But just for the audience's sake, describe precision scheduling and how it works within LiveOps.
Yeah, great question. So we schedule our shifts in 30-minute increments. It doesn't mean that the agent's only working 30 minutes for that day, but to give you an example, and this is a real life example of, one of our clients that we work with today, it is very common for us that when they open at 6 a.m., they're forecasting for 60 calls. And an hour later, they're at 90 calls. And then an hour after that, they're at 30 calls. So our 30-minute staffing levels from a precision standpoint is we can staff to exactly the amount of calls they need at 6 a.m., the exact amount of calls they need at 7 a.m., the exact amount of calls they need at 8 a.m., as well as, Darren, we all try to nail forecasting and scheduling. The reality is it never comes at 100% of what you predict. So you've got to have some flexibility inside of that. So if that volume starts running hot, because of our agent model, we're able to get qualified trained agents on within minutes, not hours, to handle that demand up or down based off what's happening from a consumer standpoint. But the precision is really 30-minute increments based off exactly where your call flow is. So you're not staffing to the peak interval, you're staffing to exactly what the number is, a requirement is.
Right. And there isn't a workforce management that gets this perfect. You're still with the best workforce management system out there. You're still not scheduled to the equivalent of what we've just discussed with precision scheduling with the WFM. So you complement the best WFMs, make them better. In being that I don't know of any way that reduces a call center's costs more than reducing labor costs. So, this is something that workforce management has a true ROI for its customers. And then you just enhance that ROI further with the precision scheduling.
Yeah, it's a great point. When we measure our clients, our customers' NPS scores, workforce management always scores us the very top of the top because we solve the problems that they cannot solve today. A workforce optimization platform, although we'll tell you what's the best way to possibly schedule based off what your workforce is, if you don't have the ability to do precision staffing, it's getting you closer to the pin, but it's not achieving the ultimate success. Our ability to, again, flow up and down with based off how the volume requirements are really solves the needs for our WFM teams and WFM partners.
Awesome. So walk us through a customer who moved to a flexible workforce model with LiveOps. What were they struggling with before? How did precision scheduling change their operation? And what does their scheduling look like now?
Yeah, good question. I think, the majority of clients that come to us, they come to us for two reasons. One is obviously the scheduling component that we're talking about. The second is because of our model and the way we've existed for, the last 26 years, is we've never had a brick and mortar center. So our talent profile from an agent, I can find talent all across the US that matches exactly where that brand is. But clients come to us mainly for those two reasons. To give you an example, we had a client that we brought on or 4 years or so. They're in the energy space. And so what happens in their business is there's two things that really happen. One is Monday volume is significantly higher than the rest of the week. And so I think they went through, before they signed on with us, they went for 3 or 4 different BPOs. They tried to hire a BPO that was only Monday because Monday volume was flex every other single day. And that solved a little bit of the need. We got on board with them and kind of shared with them our staffing model and said, okay, give us all of Monday. We can staff up as high as you need us to from a Monday standpoint with qualified agents. And I know that's just equally as important as the flexible aspect of it. Is you've got to make sure you've got quality interaction around it. Otherwise your flex doesn't really matter. You've got to have put from it. But we were able to solve their needs from a Monday standpoint. So what then happened is the business that we partnered with, the customer that we were partnered with, now they had more time to go look at how to solve problems for their business through a different lens. They were spending an enormous amount of time and resources just trying to establish the SLAs because they were bound by federal regulations because they were a gas company. They had to have certain SLAs, and they went with the route of let's staff to the highest peak that you possibly can and pray that all the agents come in on Monday so that we have high SLAs. They couldn't focus on anything else in the CX journey. They couldn't focus on how to bring technology in. They couldn't focus on other ways to drive a higher CX score. So their ability to give us the overall volume and say, we will staff to the high watermark from a Monday, as well as handle your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, et cetera. Two things happened. Their customer base was, significantly happier because they, were able to be handled when they want sit on queue or hold for 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes. And it allowed that internal business to go focus on areas that could drive their business forward outside of just the staffing component, because all they could think about was the staffing aspect of it. So that client's been with us for 3 years now, 3 or 4 years now. I'd have to go check. But the way that they operate today is much different than the way they operated 3 years ago. They're asking us for recommendations now. How would you guys staff for this? So help them schedule staffs for their internal center now, so that their internal center, they can maximize utilization and occupancy on their side without having to staff to high water mark. So said a different way, instead of just saying, hey, LiveOps, you handle 50% of the allocation, we'll handle the other 50% internally. It may be Mondays at 11 a.m. to noon, we handle 70% of the allocation. And then from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., they handle 60% because that's what their schedule accuracy internally allows them to do. So we give them both the flexibility from their customer base as well as how to maximize their internal staffing so that they've got, the overarching flexibility and cost control around it.
And we consider you guys to be an MCXP, managed CX solutions provider to your clients, where you bring not just butts and seats, but technologies that can improve their operations and reduce their costs. And now with a little more time to be able to look at their overall organization and what they want to accomplish, I imagine you have time to then bring in particular technologies like AI that can further enhance their customer service operations.
Yeah, you're dead on. It's kind of the conversation I was saying a second ago is they weren't in a position to be able to hear about other solutions because they were so focused on the staffing component that they had around SLAs and those things, that while the technology story made sense to them, they just didn't have the bandwidth to consume it. Fast forward a couple years, staffing solved, their consumer base is in a better position. Now they're adapting or adopting technology from us that's enhancing that customer experience even more. Can AI pick off some of the easier calls that you don't need humans around? Can you actually have the humans supported in a way with technology wrapped around it that increases the NPS, the CSAT scores to even more? They couldn't consume that 3 years ago because they couldn't get past the first kind of hump from a staffing standpoint. So yeah, to your call out, it typically starts with the staffing aspect of it. We do a lot more than that, obviously, as you mentioned, but people have to be able to nail that component first before they can think about adopting other aspects of it.
And now you're able to deliver on additional outcomes that they'd like to solve for or improve.
Yeah.
Which is great. So seasonal surges, holiday peaks, open enrollment, product launches, those have always been a problem. What does a flexible on-demand model make possible during those events that traditional scheduling simply cannot deliver?
Yeah, it's a great question. Seasonal, whether it's, retail from a seasonal standpoint, whether it's, tax season that we just exited, whether it's product launches, whether it's events that happen from natural disasters, hurricanes, or things from that standpoint where people need support, in that moment. There's really kind of two options you're faced with. Do I bring on a bunch of agents to staff up during that seasonality spike, which typically what happens is those agents are not as proficient as what your existing agents are. So your performance typically drops, as well as that you've got to carry that labor. You're not attracting the best talent because they know it's only a 6-week or an 8-week or a 12-week engagement. And so that's traditionally how models solve it today is let's hire temporary staffing. Let's bring them on to manage to the SLAs and accept the fact that our NPS scores are going to drop for all the reasons I just talked about. Our model solves it completely different. By design, our agents work on average 25 to 30 hours a week. Reason we do that is there's a ton of data that supports that once you get to over 40 hours, your productivity drops over 50%. So if you're asking during a seasonality spike, during a product launch for your existing base to go from 40 hours to 50 hours so that you don't lose productivity, you think, because by bringing on new agents, you're essentially doing the same thing. Our agents, by design, again, working that 25 to 30 hours, I can now flex them up from 25 to 40 to cover that seasonal demand. You don't have additional training capacity that you've got to care for to bring on new agents. You don't have a proficiency drop by having new agents on board. And you don't have a productivity drop by agents getting burned out and only, working 50, 60, 70 hours a week during that seasonal moment that then will manifest itself 2 months, a month after that seasonality spike is over with attrition numbers because you just burned out your entire labor force. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't work 70 hours a week anymore. I'm going to go look for something else. So the model is, yes, solves for the intraday staffing, the heavy Mondays, but it also solves for that elasticity inside of seasonality, whether it's retail, tax season, travel and hospitality areas from that standpoint. And it solves it in a
Friday, holidays.
Yeah. People calling it sick, whatever that, shrink is that you're seeing on a weekly basis. So it just solves it a different way than what the traditional thought process is to solve it.
And what I've seen in these situations, and I've come across a lot of them, is that when somebody is planning for times where there's going to be surges, for high volume, relatively short duration events, what they've had to do is try to contract with 5, 6 BPOs because BPOs in general don't like this work. They're not going to hit their desired margins in a traditional BPO environment when they're looking at hiring, all the costs involved for it, handling a 60-day, let's say like tax season, 60-day, 90-day project. When it's all said and done, and then they're able to repurpose some of the agents, but some they have to let go. And all in, they're not hitting their margins. They don't want that work. They'll take it if the client gives them enough significant business throughout the rest of the year, but they don't like it. And oftentimes, to be able to staff for it, the client has to find multiple BPOs to try to get the kind of coverage they need. Where now they can work with LiveOps and they can actually staff for, their normal day-to-day outsourcing, but they're able to staff for these events without having to hire multiple BPOs.
Yeah.
More or less have one throat to choke
Yeah.
for every.
Yeah, one responsible party. It's because I was going to mention that the other, amongst all the other things that you just said that were, completely accurate. If you bring on 5 to 6 BPOs to handle that surge, or even 2 or 3 BPOs to handle that surge, then you need 2x or 3x the vendor management on the client side to work with those BPOs. You've got to blend all the staffing together to make sure people are staffed at the right intervals and that you're still not over in certain intervals and under in certain intervals. And then you've got to manage to the daily shrink of not just one BPO. Now you've got to manage to shrink of 4 or 5 or 6 BPOs at once. And if they're all having, shrink in similar areas, then you're exacerbating that problem even more. And so, yes, it solves it from a top line capacity, but it does the things that you just talked about. You either pay for it because the BPO doesn't want it, because they don't make any margin on it, because it's a short-term window. So you either have to pay them a lot of money to do it, or you've got to give them other business as a carrot to do this aspect of the business because it's not profitable by itself, or you've got to bring on 3, 4, 5, or all those, BPOs or all those kind of things together to solve for the problem.
Yeah. And then when you have multiple BPOs, you have to carefully monitor and look at the quality from each one.
Yep.
And then typically the ones that are actually performing, you give them a higher percentage of calls and then decrease the percentage to the ones that are. Anyhow, it's just a lot that you have to deal with and manage that you wouldn't have to if LiveOps was your outsourcer.
Yeah.
So,
and you don't think about it either. You don't think about having to do all those different things, right? You think about, I'm just getting capacity. Like, wait, hold on. What comes with this capacity? What extra workload am I putting on the rest of the organization?
right. So some leaders hear flexible or on demand, and their first worry is quality. If agents are stepping in and out of a queue for short windows, how does LiveOps make sure someone working a precision shift delivers the same experience as a full-time agent who has been on the program for a year?
Yeah, I love this question because this is typically what we hear is people, hear gig or flexible or precision staffing, and they think, okay, you're sacrificing, quality to achieve that. And that is absolutely not the case. Our quality scores are typically much higher than, the internal centers or other BPOs that we have the pleasure to compete against. And the reason it works is it starts with the talent profile. So I mentioned we started, operations in the year 2000. It was 26 years ago. We've never had a brick and mortar center. COVID did drive us to create this model. We've operated this model since day one. And so we go look for talent across the US that wants this type of work, that specialize in this type of work, whether it's insurance. We do a lot of insurance business today from an underwriting standpoint or a claims perspective, tax season. We specialize in the talent profile first, so we don't have to teach that skill set to the individual. And then it comes down to kind of what we talked about at the beginning, that 30-minute increment shift. They're not working 30 minutes for the day. They're working 30 minutes that they've signed up for that, for that part. They work on average 25 to 30 hours, as we talked about earlier. And so you flex up and flex down off that 25 to 30. You could drop to 17, 18, 19 hours if the volume's not there and you're in a low period from a seasonality perspective, and you can flex up to, to 40. And so what it does is all these agents that work on our clients' programs, they're dedicated to that client. They're not working on a different client. So they're not coming into one client and then off to another client. They're dedicated to that program. And so their knowledge, their proficiency, their skill set, their talent, all of that shows up on a daily, outcome interaction basis. And then our model of flexing from, on the low end, 17, 18 up to, 40, 35, 40 hours on a weekly basis. That's how we create the built-in elasticity. But you have to schedule it based off a 30-minute increment to create that elasticity. If it's a 2-hour increment or an hour and a half or even an hour, you lose that ebb and flow of flexibility that, that comes with that component. So it's not about just bringing Uber drivers off the street or Lyft drivers off the street and sticking them on the phones. Like, yes, you hear gig from a lot of things from that standpoint. These are dedicated qualified. Our average agent right now is a 43-year-old college-educated female. And so they've got a lot of life experience. They've done this type of work before. They've been in the insurance space for 10, 15, 20 years. And that passion, that conviction for that business shows up on those daily interactions.
Mm-hmm. Also, it's worth noting that I've found in my experience that gig CX providers, LiveOps included, one of the things they have to do is master training. What I've seen is that a client might have a training program that is usually 6 weeks, and LiveOps will fine tune that training and get it to the point where they're able to train the agents in 3 weeks, maybe even 2 weeks, but still without it affecting the quality of the agent and the training they get. It's just something that had to become a core competency for you guys, and that it's worth mentioning that that's something you guys do really well, better than most contact centers can do for themselves. So that's part of it. They're getting the same quality agent, but also worth mentioning, and we haven't talked about this, in your model, you're able to bring in talent that wouldn't be available to other contact centers, wouldn't be available for a contact center to hire directly. For example, you've got an at-home mom who, maybe she ran contact center operations in her last role, but now she's home with her kid and she has a few hours available here and a few hours available there, but she can't leave the house and come in and work an 8-hour shift. Maybe she can't even come in and do a 4-hour shift. But in your model, she can plug in for 2 or 3 hours here, 2 or 3 hours there. So that's talent that wouldn't even be available. Maybe even overqualified candidates wouldn't be available typically. But in your model, this talent's available. You're able to bring them on as contractors and make them available to your clients. And I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Our North Star, if you will, is, and things that we kind of center around is how do we improve the lives of our agents? And that really comes through the flexibility that you just talked about. That mom that wants to be there to see her kid off at school in the morning and pick him or her up in the afternoon, they don't have an interest of going in or working from home from a traditional call center. They want to choose the schedule that they want to work that fits around their life. And if you can give them that vehicle or that avenue to do that, then you get access to much higher talent that the traditional models don't have access to because they don't provide them with that same flexibility. So it's a really good point you bring up.
Isn't it true that more often than not, someone can, let's say I came on board with LiveOps, I could give you my availability. I can give you my schedule of all the, areas where I could work for 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours. I can give you that, and you'd be able to then staff me around my availability.
Yeah, you pick your schedule. So when you come on board, we tell you, here's the minimum hours that you need to get in from a weekly basis. You get to pick them. And so we release our schedules 2 to 3 weeks in advance, and they're released in 30-minute increments. And the agents, they know when it gets released, they'll go in and they'll say, this works for my schedule, this works for my schedule, this works for my schedule, this doesn't. I'm not going to sign up here. I'm not going to sign up here. I'm going to sign up here. So they build their own schedule, which is the cool part, because then it's less about us having to remember all the Darrens of the world and the 2 to 3 hours that they've got available. And we release the schedule out to all of our agents for that dedicated program. And then the agent goes and self-selects based off what's available for them as their lifestyle that they're trying to adhere to and what their availability has. And then that's how they produce their schedules. And so it's a cool system that allows us to, again, to the workforce management component, trying to schedule a bunch of 30-minute shifts and roll them out to people would be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
Sit on its head, and you push the open spots out to the agents and you say, here's what's available. And then they go sign up based off, what works with their, life schedule.
And let me give you a scenario. Let's say I hate Nike, but I love Adidas.
Yep.
And amongst the campaigns you're working on, there's Nike and Adidas. I don't want Nike. I don't like Nike for whatever reason.
Yep.
But I'm a big fan of Adidas. I've got their shirts and their shoes and hats and everything.
Yep.
Can I choose Adidas and not choose Nike?
Yeah.
That way I'm a natural advocate for the calls I'm handling?
Yeah, you're dead on. So that goes back to the agents self-select the programs that they want to work for. We validate that their skill set actually matches the skill set that's required for that program. But a lot of times, because our sourcing window is so large, it's across the entire United States, they have a brand affinity that they want to support or a cause that they're super passionate about. They're passionate about life insurance. They're passionate about, claim work when people need it. They're passionate about Adidas or Nike or a specific brand that's out there. When they come into our ecosystem, before they're granted access to our system, there's a lot of testing that we do up front to make sure that they, are a good agent, all the things that we look for from a skill set perspective. And then what they see is all the opportunities that are available and the brands or the programs that they are. And they say, I really love life insurance. I really love Adidas, or I really love Nike. And then they go, self-select for that training, go through an interview process with us that allows them to be selected. Then they spend, somewhere between a week to 3 weeks, depending on what the program is, in our learning and development team, and getting onboarded around all the, the nuances of that program, the technology that's associated with it, learning all the ins and outs. And then they're off to the races. They've got supervisors that help support them on a daily function if they need help, but they're off to the races. And it's a very good point, because if you're hiring based off availability and that person does not have a passion around that brand or cause, you can't replicate that on the phone. If someone does have a passion around that, that comes through on the phone just naturally. And that's a big part of the reason why our NPS and CSAT scores are so much higher than what, typically what we see from a competitor standpoint or an in-house standpoint, is because you're leading with people that have brand affinity for that product first, teaching them the nuances of the program, and then releasing them to help those consumers that have that same passion for that brand.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a natural means of bringing on advocates for your clients, which is so valuable. I mean, if I could have a couple hundred agents that are as passionate about my business and they're consumers of it, I mean, that's the best case scenario right there.
Great.
Love it.
Cool.
Let's move on to something exciting. And I'm going to veer away from what I was going to ask you.
Okay.
And I want to move into something more fun and more compelling, which are, if you could share some of your most compelling case studies, as well as some of your most exciting returns on investment that you've been able to show a client. Because I know in your model, I know that, for instance, if a client were to replace agents they lost with a LiveOps agent, you're basically reducing their HR and OPEX costs by 30%, and you're taking on all the costs of replacing that agent. That's just one example, but all the different ways you're saving money on staffing costs with precision staff. There's so many different ways that you provide a return on investment. So let's come up with some of your best or your favorite case studies and some of your most compelling return on investments.
Yeah, my favorite of all time case study was working with the SBA when COVID hit, and they called us. This was a crazy time. They called us and they said we need 15,000 agents in a 72-hour period to help with the PPP loans when COVID first kind of hit us, and so. That was a super exciting time to, our model helped solve for a lot of people that were disrupted and allowed them to get access to funding. And so it pulled on the heartstrings from that standpoint, but there's not I don't know if there's maybe a handful of companies that are out there that could pick up that phone call and say, yes, we can get agents trained in a 72-hour period. We already have them on staff to help you with that, that standpoint. That's probably my favorite case study of all time. That happen every day. Obviously, we don't want COVID to ever come back, from that perspective. But, the traditional stuff that we see is, a lot of our clients, as we engage with them, they think it's too good to be true. Okay, you say you can schedule in 30 minutes. You've got access to talent across the US. My favorite thing is when the light bulb clicks on for the client. And it's very similar to what we talked about before. They spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out how to balance the staffing and the spend, either sacrifice CX scores or sacrifice spend. And when they truly understand the value of our model, and it typically goes something like this. They start with us with, 20, 25 agents. They're somewhat reserved around what we've told them is actually true and capable to do. They get in, they see the profile of the agent, they engage with, because a lot of our clients want to be involved in training with the agent. So they're sitting, in a virtual room with our agents for, a couple hours a day, several days a week for sometimes multiple weeks, training our folks. And that's the first kind of light bulb that clicks on. Then they see the power of the scheduling or the precision scheduling that goes up and down to solve for the needs. And they get my favorite, in fact, one of the gas client that I was just talking about before, they were talking about, I think it was, I don't remember which hurricane it was, but it was a hurricane that had happened and it wiped out power to, $3.5-4 million or 4 million people on the East Coast. And we were the company behind that, helping staff to help people that were calling in to get power turned back on or power turned off or needed help from some standpoint around that. So our flexibility around that component really frees up companies. And this is the case study we see quite a bit is they get to go focus on other areas of the business to drive consumer adoption or member adoption or patient experience. We do a lot of work in the healthcare space, and there's some real tearjerkers from that standpoint. And being able to, we support a lot of patients that we have to check in on, on either a weekly basis or a monthly basis. And we don't have to force them into checking in with us or supporting them on the schedule that works for our agents that are reaching out, our ambassadors, our advocates. We can check in based off what's best for that patient when they're available to need support, whether it's pre-scheduled or life had happened and they need to reach back out to one of our ambassadors. Our ambassadors are there to help them. And so most of my favorite case studies are centered around what we all experience in real human life, medical emergencies, hurricanes, tax season, whatever it may be, and being able to help those consumers, those patients, those members in a time when they actually need it, and being able to handle it and help them with answers that actually solve the question they have, and answers that we'll get back to you later, or the client will get back to you later, or whatever it is. They're trained, qualified associates to be able to solve that problem. The secondary part of that is what we've been talking about. The businesses or the clients that we focus or that we work with today, they can let go of the staffing component and know that it's in a good place, and it allows them to go focus on the overall CX journey that overall brings better patient scores, better consumer scores, better member scores to
Great advocate.
what they're trying to do as a business. And then, as you mentioned, the whole technology aspect of it. Now they're able to go look at how we solve some of those outputs or outcomes or friction points that are caused by different technologies or different processes that you run, and be able to test those and think about those things in a way that you wouldn't have 6, 12, 18, 24 months ago, because you were so focused on making sure that the staffing was in a place that could be acceptable.
Love it. Let's talk about ROI though, before we end, because I know that there's multiple ways that you create ROI for clients. Is it something that when you start working with a client and understand their use cases and where you're able to provide the best value, where maybe even initially you're able to quote the client, hey, we're looking at about this kind of ROI. Are you able to do that? Or is it just after the fact, once you've worked with a client and able to get their data, you're able to then see and show them the ROI that they are now enjoying?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of twofold, and we definitely show them the ROI up front, because our model, and I don't think I've mentioned this before, our model is a per minute model. So our clients only get charged when our agents are actually talking to one of their consumers or one of their patients from that
Productive time.
Productive time. Yeah. So they're on a phone call, on a chat, on a text message, social media, whatever the vehicle engagement is, that's the only time that they're billed for it. So their utilization that they try to schedule for becomes a non-factor, because it's only based off billable. So right there, that alone typically saves them, 25, 30%. You don't pay for lunches anymore. You don't pay for breaks anymore. You don't have to figure out how to have coverage for those things to where you're paying for somebody on break and paying for somebody to answer the phone. So
And imagine maternity and paternity leave and stuff like
yeah,
that.
all the shrink that happens, PTO, all the things that are going on there. So we actually have a calculator on our website that kind of breaks this down and shows people that if, typically you would, need 50 FTE to handle that business, you can do it for 30% cheaper with our again, without sacrificing quality or experience or anything from that standpoint. So we lean heavily on that component of it from an ROI standpoint, and that typically makes sense for them. That resonates. What doesn't resonate with them until they actually get it and kind of see the action around it is how powerful that is. Okay, I started with 20 agents, but if I did this across 100 agents or 150 agents, the ROI on that becomes much bigger. The other thing that they typically see from a human standpoint is back to that talent profile, that passion around that brand or that, instance that they're involved in showcases on the phone, which leads to a better lifetime value score for that consumer or for that patient, whether it's attrition, retention, how much they spend. We typically see that, especially from an upsell, cross-sell standpoint, that typically goes up 12 to 14% because they're working with like-minded people that have the same passion around the brand that they do. And so it's kind of twofold. And it's upfront. The math makes sense on you're only paying for productive billable time when they're actually connecting with a consumer. But then they see it on the back end as well in terms of lifetime value, sales, cross sells, retention. We all know in any business, it is significantly harder to acquire a consumer than it is to retain them. And so once you have them in your doors, you need to do everything you can to make sure that if they're spending a free dollar, they're spending it with you.
Yeah. Attrition alone, it's almost a no-brainer for most contact centers that if they worked with LiveOps and you let LiveOps replace agents that left, you're taking on the cost of attrition. I mean, it's an easy, roughly 30% savings. Depending on who you talk to, it's $2,500 to $10,000 per employee that you have to replace. Be able to hand that over to LiveOps. It's just one tiny brilliant thing a call center can do to improve how they handle attrition and reduce the costs for it. There are so many different ways that you create ROI. We could do a whole podcast on just that.
Good.
Well, I think we'll probably come back at some point, talk about some of the other value points for precision staffing, or as I call the in general segment you're in, Gig CX. I think it's revolutionary. I think every contact center executive should understand it because it has a value point for everyone. And when you see it and you understand it and you look at the what the cost benefits are, I can't imagine too many contact center executives that really understood LiveOps, for example, inside and out, that wouldn't want to partner. It's just that great a value.
Yeah, we feel the same way, obviously. And we feel like we can help solve problems a different way and help, achieve the ultimate success that a lot of our clients are, working for. And, we've been fortunate in the fact that a lot of our clients have stayed with us for a lot of years. And I think it ultimately ties back to a lot of the different things that we talked about today. But yeah, it just has so many different applications you can use. It's why I joined LiveOps 10 years ago, was for this exact reason. I got sick of having to try to solve for this staffing component. And when I figured out LiveOps did this work, this is exactly who I want this aspect of it. And so it's been a fun ride. It's been a rocket ship of a ride, to say the least. But it's fun solving problems in different ways than just trying to get more out of the traditional way of solving problems, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. This was a great episode, and I think people are really going to enjoy it. I will mention that Cloud Tech Gurus is a proud distributor for LiveOps. And so if anyone listening wants to learn more about LiveOps, get in a conversation with LiveOps to talk about use cases, ROI, etc., we can help get that scheduled for you. And we will in either the show notes or magically my marketing person will have it pop up here at the end of the video, share that information. And Jon, let's do it again. This was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you, spending your Friday afternoon with me and enjoyed the conversation and, happy to come back.
Thank you kindly.